Perhaps we are tearing a bit of the obscurity and snobbery that attends poetry usually away. What we're really doing is bringing poetry where it belongs, back to music and back to an informality, away from the classroom.
Leonard Cohen, Spice Box of Earth, take 1.
Okay, Leonard, we start on a spice box, and any place we come across a dirty word, we have to delete it.
Yeah, well, there are no dirty words, ever.
Poet, songwriter, novelist, singer. Which do you prefer if you were going to be introduced as something?
Whatever you create, it gets away from you. It's just, I just assume be introduced as a vegetarian.
Is that the key to your diversity?
I'm all in one place. The borders have faded between a lot of endeavors, and I think people are no longer capable of those kind of poses, like the poet, on the mountain with the cape, or the singer, sort of catering to the masses. All those kinds of expression, they don't mean anything to me. It's just a matter of what your hand falls on. And if you can make what your hand falls on sing, then you can just do it. I think it comes down to that. You really do what sings. History and time pretty well builds obsolescence into poetry, unless it's really the great stuff. And you never know whether you're really hitting that.
Don't you ever?
Sometimes you know about it. But I'm not interested in posterity, which is somebody's sort of kind of paltry form of eternity. I like to see the headlines instead of the Spencer case, something like, "Town finishes painting today." I like the stuff I do to have that kind of horizontal immediacy rather than something that is going to be around for a long time. I'm not interested in an insurance plan for my work.
Don't you read your own publicity?
Well, I read it, but I read it as a mistake. And I say, here's another mistake.
From what I know about you, you went through the usual schools and you got into law and decided that wasn't for you, and then you went back for an MA and decided that was out. To drift, to go through all the motions and end up a poet, seems somewhere along the road you made certain decisions for yourself that were...
Listen, I didn't end up a poet. That isn't the restroom. I wasn't looking for this. This is just a kind of ID card that you've got to carry somehow because people are continually asking you for an ID card. Poetry is not an exclusive domain of writers or of poets, and poetry is a verdict, not a choice. First poem I wrote when I was 9. It was after my father died, and I felt some very special urgency to say something. And I wrote some words down, and then I took one of his formal bow ties, and I slit it open with a razor blade, and I put this little note, this little poem into the tie, and I buried it in the garden. I think that was the first time I'd ever used language in a sacramental way. It was a kind of ritual, but I saw poetry very much in those days as a ritual, as a sacramental use of language. The fact is that you establish what a sacramental relationship is. You establish what is holy. I can see sex operating in a completely chaste friendship. Whole society was based on the idea of chastity at one time. It's a beautiful idea of the inviolate.
Montreal, in those days when the 3 different religions were armed fortresses, it was impossible not to be impressed. It was impossible to ignore the signs of the church, the nuns on the street, the churches, the crosses. It always fascinated me. I was so touched as a child by the music and that kind of charged speech that I heard in the synagogue, where everything was important, where there was the absence of the casual always has attracted me. It's always stayed that way. That's why I've never been terribly touched by the kind of work that is so deliberately casual, so deliberately colloquial. It isn't the sweetness for me, it isn't delicious. The world was created through words, through speech in our tradition. I've always seen the enormous light in charged speech, and that's what I've tried to get to. Of course, that's a hazardous position because you can get a kind of highfalutin sound that doesn't really strike the ear very well either. So it has its risks, that kind of attachment. But that is where I squarely stand. I always had the notion I had, a tiny garden to cultivate. I never thought I was really one of the big guys. So my work, the work that was in front of me, was just to cultivate this tiny corner of the field that I thought I knew something about, which was something to do with self-investigation without self-indulgence. I never liked the latter too much as a mode. Just pure confession I never felt was really interesting, but confession filtered through a tradition of skill and hard work.
The perfect word to express what you mean might not rhyme. Did you find that?
No, but I don't feel any sense of evangelism about the matter. But I think that much of the work that is done today in songwriting and in verse suffers from this unwillingness to submit yourself to the anvil of rhythm and rhyme. It makes it too easy. When you are compelled to find rhymes and to satisfy rhythms, it makes you run through everything you know about the language. It makes you test every idea. Now, I'm not advising this as a modus operandi for anybody, but I know that the reason that I write is to discover the newness of my mind and the newness of my thought. And that can only be discovered when you submit yourself to this process in which you have to defend the words and the lines and the new ideas. Nothing new arises if you're just allowed to unfold your thought with no attention.
What sort of started the process of writing poetry? What made you find this kind of satisfaction?
I think it was just the sound of the voice.
From an early age?
Yeah, I just always was moved by, liturgical music and the idea of the chant, and by popular songs, and folk songs, whatever we call that early awakening. One of the ways to evoke the God in yourself was to have this certain kind of music, which I associate with the chant or with certain kinds of repetition. And I guess that's what I wanted to do. It's a matter of both habit, discipline, and pleasure to me to perform that kind of prayer that I call writing. It brings you very close to what we consider God is, the author, the creator. When I'm close to it, I feel very good. I ride an emotion with words so that I keep the document going, and I always consider it all part of one long song.
The Bible. That was the way poetry came to me in the beginning, and that was the book I read, and the liturgy was the thing that really moved me, and I always just felt part of it, and I always felt that was my work. I never saw it in any formal way. I just saw it as what I had to do. I never thought I was working in any sort of academic tradition. I just thought that if I had a job in the world, this was it. This was what I was a kind of priestly singer.
It had a lot to do with emotion. It had a lot to do with what I thought was just the beauty of the city. And I guess just becoming adult and having the world somewhat manipulable. And let us compare mythologies. I wrote some of those poems when I was 15 or 16. And they're okay. They have the real quality of a delight in language and just the freshness. And I think it's been downhill ever since. So those are real poems.
With Annie gone, whose eyes to compare to the morning sun? Not that I did compare, but I do compare now that she's gone. Yeah, it was nice. There were a number of poems I wrote for Anne. I felt I could do no wrong, and she could do no wrong. I would give her these poems. I guess I was about 23. And she was a glorious woman. And I'd leave these poems for her here and there.
I think Leighton once said the two qualities necessary for a young writer are arrogance and inexperience. You really don't know how serious it is, this situation between men and women when you're 15 or 16. What you really want to do is get into it. And you can use your imagination and take up all the hints, but you're not really in it. You haven't really walked into the cage with the beast. The beast being, your own heart. I think that when you're very young and you begin writing, you write out of a certain energy and a certain appetite. And if you're a lyric poet, those are the years that it really unfolds. Then as you get older, and that, as Browning said, the first fine lyric frenzy dissolves somewhat, there's a change of gears and another kind of work that you start looking at, maybe something longer. Your own interior situation demands more and more clarification and more complexity. You have to try different forms, and that's usually where the young poets die, and they can't get beyond their late 20s or their 30s. And to carry the whole thing forward, that takes special kind of courage, because there's every invitation as you grow older to shut up. You've made a mess of things yourself, generally speaking, and you feel you don't really have much of a right to speak about anything. And what you really want to do is lick your wounds. I think for many people this is true. And to rise above that and to incorporate your own defeats and failures and insights, as shabby as they are, into a really large body of work, yeah, that takes a real effort.
The most challenging activity that humans get into, which is love. We have the sense that we can't live without love, that life has very little meaning without love. So we're invited into this arena where the possibilities for humiliation and failure are ample. There's no fixed lesson. The heart is always opening and closing. It's always softening and hardening. We're always experiencing joy or sadness. So there's no jackpot.
My idea when I started writing poems was always music. And I frankly am not really interested in the future of the novel, or the death of the novel, or what's happening in the writing world. I don't say that I'll always feel this alienated from the whole world of letters. So at this time, right now, I feel I don't have the luxury to, or the time to examine my loyalties via form. I just know that whatever my hand falls on, I have to explore. And it's the song now. But I do that with bringing everything I've got to the song.
I have never believed that I have really that kind of mind that can explore profundities in closet. To me, one of the best things I could ever do was to write a song and sing it to people. That's all I ever wanted to do. I never started off with any more exalted idea than that. For me, poetry is the evidence of a life and not the life itself. It's the ashes of something that is burning well. Sometimes you confuse yourself and try to create ashes instead of fire. Usually the songs are suggested by playing guitar, and the phrase comes with the chord change, and that's how it begins. Songs, rhythms are the emotional life of most people. I think there's music everywhere, That is the literature of our day. Those lyrics, those songs are how people wash the dishes and court each other, and it's everywhere. When you're writing a song and you hear in your mind that it's spoken, uttered, that you're drawn to the inflections of street talk, the inflections of conversation. That's what really delights one in a song, is to hear
in the space of 6 or 7 stanzas, so many references to ordinary speech. I think of Dylan, who does that with such mastery, where you can hear a little tough guy talking, you can hear somebody praying, you can hear somebody asking, you can hear somebody coming on to you. I think that when you're composing that material and you know that it's going to occupy oral space, you can compose it with those inflections in mind.
We all have these archetypes floating around in our minds, and we become them from moment to moment. So that guy was like a know-it-all who'd been there and done that and seen it all. That was how it began. But then, under the tyranny of rhyme, other lines emerged that I could never possibly come up with. There are good lines there of long stem rose and without your clothes. Things like that are just wonderful gifts. It began to allow me to explore my own feelings about the way things were, rather than become active in some cause, which is not really my nature. I think Yeats's father said poetry is the social act of a solitary man. I've never had much faith in my own take on things, and I know that the world is far too complex for a solution. This is not the realm of solutions. We were exiled from the garden. That's what I understand is the nature of the human predicament. I mean, this is not paradise. And we can't really put the world in order. It doesn't mean one shouldn't try to live in harmony with oneself and one's friends. As far as bigger visions are concerned, I don't have the equipment to unfold or decipher this bewildering range of human activity that confronts me. I certainly accept that. And if I'm not at peace, I accept that too.
I thought I was pretty well washed up as a writer. I tried to write a few things and nothing had happened, and the kind of writing I could do easily I didn't want to do anymore. I thought when I sat down out of habit in front of a page that I knew I could put things down that would be pleasing and that stood a chance of making a kind of limping way through the world. I knew I could do that since I have the apparatus of discipline left over from other books. I thought I could sit down and do something. But I was just sick at everything I did, and any of the more ambitious projects seemed to fall away after 5 or 6 chapters. And I didn't even know whether I wanted to write at all. And the whole idea of career in literature and the world of letters had, by this time, deeply poisoned me. I just simply wasn't interested in the whole enterprise.
It was a sort of image of you as a misery mongering.
Yeah, it's like the assumption is that the world is really very gay and jovial and nothing terrible ever happens. I think the songs are true and they're not for everybody. But I think that the effect they have on people whose nature can respond to them is far from depressing.
I don't think this is a book you can write on the basis of a decision. You either find yourself up against the wall in some kind of trouble, and this is the only thing that can penetrate the silence that you find yourself in. The despair. I don't think you approach this subject unless you're driven to it, unless all the other avenues of expression are blocked.
Dealing with a prevailing sense of anxiety, anguish, distress was a central activity of my days and nights. It was not a luxury for me to write. It was a necessity.
I think you do a lot to affirm your worthiness by writing. I remember a prose poem by Baudelaire in which he says, today I betrayed 3 friends. I refused to give a recommendation to someone who deserves it. I gave one to someone who doesn't. I lied 6 or 7 times, and now that I'm in my room and I lock my door, let me do one thing that will justify myself to myself. I think that's a very accurate picture of the process, of this particular racket. One gets the impression that a man plans his life or plans the direction of his work
as for me, it's never been that way. I'm grateful to get a poem. I don't question the sources too carefully. If I get a song, I don't have any regrets about it not being an epic. I don't question the gods of these things.
I made several contracts with myself that involved completing the work I began or not completing it, and the various consequences that attended not completing it. If I didn't finish this, I simply wasn't willing to continue in any capacity, because I really thought that, like somebody in front of a roulette wheel or with your hand at poker, you really feel that if you're really that bad a player, it's all going to be revealed to you in the next deal. If your cards are really that bad, then really you got to step out of the game. And I decided one morning that I would start under those new terms. And I had been thinking for some time about Catherine Tekakwitha, who was a Mohawk girl whom the Jesuits converted in the 17th century. It took a year to write. It seemed like a kind of testing that involved me every day. You know, whenever I woke up, I just knew that today was another exam. I said when I began it that I'm going to leave nothing out of this book. Everything I know and everything I'm capable of receiving is going to be there, and those are the conditions under which I wrote it. And I don't think I betrayed the conditions. I felt very much like any gambler. In other words, you know, if you look at a dealer in the wrong way, you're probably going to get bad cards. But I think that the dealer has some inscrutable expression if he's a good dealer, and the one I was dealing with is the best dealer.
This is a book that I would have liked to stumble on at the corner of a bookstore and bring home and read, and not have any of the publicity or knowledge of the author standing between me and the immediate perception of those pages, because it's very, very intimate, and it has to be read when you're feeling intimate.
I think that the nature of the poem on the page, wet and black, and is designed to be read in the chamber of the heart, and then the song by its nature has to move from lip to lip. It's a different medium. I think that when you read a poem, it takes place in the inside. The music, the authority, the rhythm, it's inside. Sometimes in a failure, a poem will stand on the page and you can't sing it well. And you can take a song that's good and print the lyrics, and they really don't stand up.
In writing, if you can discard the slogans that naturally come to you, what is right, what is the good position, it's something that goes beyond what has been called political correctness. It's a kind of tyranny of posture. Those ideas are swarming through the air like locusts, and it's difficult for the writer to determine what he really thinks about things, what he really feels. In my own case, I have to write the verse and then see if it's a slogan or not, and then toss it. But I can't toss it until I've worked on it and seen what it really is. Until that process, writing the verse and discarding it till I get down to something that doesn't sound like a slogan, that doesn't sound like something that's easy.
What I like to do when I sing is establish an atmosphere where everybody can feel comfortable in the circle that I try to lay over the moment.
If I do finish another record, I would like to tour behind it. But at the beginning it was rock and roll and that, the life of the appetite. After the second and third tour, you begin to get very interested in the music, in the performance, in the test of character that the performance involves.
As far as the hazards of the poet are concerned, they're very much like the hazards of any man, which is self-betrayal and compromise. I mean, we are susceptible to every kind of disease. And when you are courting the love of an audience or the money of an audience, I suppose that one is led into very suspicious areas. But I think with every kind of endeavor, this is precisely those kinds of hazards that separate the wheat from the chaff. You know, every performance is a test of character. When you're on a stage, there are many things you can do. You can sell out to the audience. You can work for their applause. Or you can challenge them to produce something that is better than both of you together. You can, in some way, try to make something that is more. It's hard to put this into words because it only happens from time to time when you really are clean inside. Sometimes you can live in the song, and sometimes it is inhospitable and it won't admit you, and you're left banging at the door, and everybody knows it. It really depends a great deal on the moment, on the kind of shape that you're in, how straight you are with yourself at the moment, how straight you've been with the audience. There are many factors that determine whether you are going to be able to make the song live.
One of the things I liked about the early Ginsberg and Kerouac and Corso was their use of the word angel. You know, sometimes it's just the girl who sells you cigarettes saying, "Have a good day," that changes the day. In that function, she is an angel. An angel has no will of its own. It is only a messenger. It is only a channel for another kind of, for the will. We sense that there is a will that is behind all things, and we're also aware of our own will. And it's the distance between those two wills that creates the mystery that we call religion. It is the attempt to reconcile our will with another will that we can't quite put our finger on, but we feel is powerful and existent. It's the space between those two wills that creates our predicament. And we call that prayer when we can affirm it. Marriage is the real monastery. You know, it's for high-minded spiritual people. It's too tough for most people. But really, marriage is the best human device for, you know, getting through the months and years. It really is a practice. It's a kind of discipline that we're not even prepared for. Just to live that close to anybody today, with the emphasis on individuality and every invitation on every billboard to disperse yourself, it's pretty tough. There's no support for it in society. Every story, every film is about a kind of mythical freedom that we are all encouraged to embrace, but it is just a myth. That represents a part of our nature. We do have this notion that being free is to experience endless variety. We have become consumers in every sense. We really want a vast range of people, ideas, experiences to consume, as if the universe didn't also take place in a grain of sand, as Blake said.
You've been musing on your own mortality in your lyrics for some time now. I'm thinking back to 1988 in Tower of Song, and of course you famously wrote, "Well, my friends are gone, my hair is gray, I ache in places where I used to play." That was 20 years ago now. How much do you reflect upon your own mortality now?
The body sends a number of messages to you as you get older, that this is not going to go on forever.
When a couple of decades ago in a CBC interview, you were asked, what are you more sure of now than when you were a teenager? And you said death. I mean, you have been thinking about it for a while. So are you more sure now?
I'm not sure that I'm going to die, yes.
Is there a way to prepare for that?
Well, like with anything else, there's a certain degree of free will. I mean, you put in your best efforts. There are whole religious and spiritual methodologies that invite you to prepare for death, and you can embark upon them, but you can't command the consequences.